All right, thanks, Elaine. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining our tips and tricks webinar for March here. Hope all of you guys, at least that are down in Dallas and the Texas area, are getting unburied from all of the snow you had. I know it made getting home from Louisiana yesterday a little bit of a challenge. Anyway, let's just jump right into it. Today I wanted to kind of continue with our theme that we started last week of some of the initial settings that you should do when you first set up a firewall, one of the WatchGuard fireboxes. And one of the things that really makes WatchGuard unique is the fact that we are a true proxy firewall. All of our security mechanisms flow through one of our proxies. So whether you're doing HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, SMTP, POP3, any of those protocols, we have the ability to do packet reassembly inside the firewall. And this gives us the ability to really dive deep into the traffic and to really get a good handle on what it's doing, what's going where, and looking at the different pieces of that traffic. It really gives us the power to really deeply analyze that, and we can modify and tweak that traffic. Really, just about anything you could think of doing, we can do with that. Unfortunately, what happens sometimes is when we turn some of these proxies on is we end up breaking a lot of the websites out there that we're dealing with. So I wanted to cover a couple of different tips and tricks, some default settings that I always do anytime I build a proxy to make sure that I'm not breaking the internet, basically. If the CEO wants to look at the panda cam at the National Zoo, he should be able to do that. So we want to make sure that we're not getting in the way of business, that we're not getting in the way of traffic. So as we do this, let's jump into our proxies here. I'm going to start out in the Policy Manager, and let's just add in quick review. These are the different proxies that are available. We can do a DNS proxy, which is designed to protect your DNS server from attack. FTP, HTTP, HTTPS, POP3, and SMTP are all used to do the deeper analysis of your traffic. We have proxies in place for H323 and SIP to protect your voice over IP phone systems. And then we have a catch-all proxy down here at the bottom, our TCP UDP proxy, which basically has the function of if everything else, if a rule doesn't match anything else for our outbound rule, we can say, throw it back into some of the checks that we did in our proxies up above. So you can set it up as individual proxies if you need several different groups, or you need the control level to be able to say one group has this set of permissions, another group does not. Or you can set up just this outgoing TCP UDP proxy, which should catch all traffic and do it if you only need a single proxy policy to control everybody. But looking at our web traffic, our HTTP proxy is typically where we want to concentrate and focus our work. So I'm going to add just a blank proxy here, a clean one. First thing I always do, make sure you give it a good name that's descriptive of what you're doing. Now we'll leave our default settings from any trusted, so anybody on the inside of our network is allowed to go out to any external. We can turn on the application control. We can do the intrusion prevention system outside of the proxy. These pieces aren't reliant on doing the deep packet analysis. These are looking at signatures in the traffic that we can see whether we're doing proxy or not, so that we can turn on and be able to control the applications or defend against known attacks. One thing, since everything we do now ties into the Dimension server, our new logging and reporting product, I do always advise people, even if you're not turning on application control to block things, if I look at my global settings here and tell it to show only configured applications, my list is empty. So even though I'm not blocking anything, I'm not controlling anything, by checking the box and turning on application control, I still get the logging of what applications are being used on my network. That way I can see if somebody's doing Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or something like that. So let's jump into the proxy action now. What I want to show and highlight first of all is when I pull down my list of proxy actions, There's a couple of blue entries in here. Anytime we have an entry that is in blue, this indicates that this is something that is a template or a standard within the WatchGuard firewall that cannot be changed. It has some base settings to it. You know, certain checkboxes are checked, and everything works off of these. If you select one of these and tell it to edit the actions or to clone off the action, it'll ask you to give it a new name so that you can always go back to the baseline. So remember, your blue stuff is your baseline. Now, there are two different versions in here. We have both a server and server.standard and client.standard. Now, the server side I'm not going to spend much time with. The server side is mostly, this opens it up wide open so that you can have a web server on the inside of your network and allow the public in. But what we're really interested in looking at is your inside clients going out to the world. Now, the difference between HTTP-client and HTTP-client.standard. This was a change that was introduced in 11.9.3, and I'm going to cover both ways and illustrate some of the differences that we have in here. One of the things that WatchGuard has realized over the years is we set our default stance to be as secure as possible. And unfortunately, if somebody didn't have a lot of familiarity with the product, they would turn on the proxies, they would turn on the default stance, which prior to 11.9.3 was this HTTP-client. When they turned on the HTTP-client and didn't make any other changes to the proxy settings, they just went in, turned on gateway antivirus, maybe turned on their web blocker settings, a lot of the internet traffic would break and it would cause problems. People would get frustrated, they would turn the proxies off, or they would call support and have to work through a support case. So not only were our technicians dealing with a lot of questions with this, a lot of people were getting frustrated because they couldn't do the deep inspection. They could, at that point, they lost web content filtering, they lost gateway antivirus, they lost reputation-enabled defense. So how do you prevent that from happening? What do you do to make sure, if you're using the default settings, what do you have to change to make sure that the internet traffic does not get interrupted? So let's start with the older way of doing it. So this is going to apply to anybody running 11.9.2 or earlier. The HTTP-client, the default settings in here, if I go in and edit these, there's certain things. There were 3 check boxes that I always told people right off the bat. If you create a proxy, these are the things you should check right away no matter what. And if you've been in a training class, I drill these in every time I've been in a training class. The very first thing that you should ever check in your proxies is, first of all, make sure you check Enable Logging for Reports. Enable Logging for Reports gives us the deeper, more robust reporting, as opposed to just, this tells us where people are going, what they're doing, how they're using the internet, as opposed to just an IP address and its destination IP address. So this is always the first thing you should check. There's a couple of other check boxes in here that will make a difference. The one I want to highlight in here is the range requests. And the checkbox says allow range requests through unmodified. And if you want to get into the technical details of what that does, send me an email and we can talk about that and what it's actually meant for. But the result of having this checkbox clear, if you do not check this box, you're going to see failures in a couple of different places. The first one is going to be if you have any kind of Mac client. Android isn't affected, but Mac clients, iOS or Mac OS, and they try to get to a streaming media website. If you do not check this box, the videos will fail to play on YouTube, pure and simple. It's a known issue. This is one of those things we go in and we turn it on no matter what. The other thing that we're seeing more and more common these days is if you're doing any of the Microsoft click-to-install products, especially Office 365. Without this box checked, those click-to-install installations for Word or Excel or the entire Office 365 suite, whatever you happen to be doing, without this checkbox, it's not going to work for you. So this is one of those simple things you can do to clean up some problems. And of course, since we're using Dimension, That means if we see a checkbox that says log this action, we want to do that because we want to get the best reporting possible. Now, there's another thing on this general settings tab that sometimes can cause problems. It's not as common, but the place I've seen is where I've gotten in and started doing a custom computer that I wanted to order online or customizing a server from one of the major players out there. Every time you add a configuration option to that server or PC that you're customizing, I've seen several websites that do this. They add that as part of the URL. Eventually, that URL gets so long, it actually overloads this setting right here, the URL path length. If that URL gets to be 3 feet long with all of the different customization options you've set, we have a default setting of basically 2048 bytes. So that if that URL gets longer than that and takes more than that, in the old days we might have thought that was an attack or something, it would start failing. You would lose your customization, your next web page wouldn't work. You'd have to get in and dig into the logs and make sure that you found that entry and found out why it failed. It wasn't real obvious why it would fail. So I've always recommended when people are setting this URL path link, double that setting to 4096. Give it twice as much space. I've never had one, when I set it to 4096, I've never had one get longer than that. So that should be pretty safe for you. So again, on this General Settings tab, just a quick review. First 3 checkboxes: enable logging for reports, allow range requests through unmodified, and of course log the action. The other one is set the URL path link, and I like to double that to 4096. Now, let's get into the piece that is going to break most of your internet connections. It's going to give you problems when you're trying to surf the internet. So when we go out and we do an HTTP request, the server sends back an HTTP response. And we jump down here to our content types field. So with the content types, what this is doing is this is looking at the MIME types of the traffic that is being sent back to your client. And our default stance here is we are very secure because we're saying these are the list of MIME types that we allow through. Our actions down here at the bottom, it says if it matches that list, allow it. If it doesn't match that list, deny it. Don't let it through. So we've got maybe a dozen things in here. What's missing from that list? Well, I see a Shockwave Flash, and there's a PDF in here, but Word, Excel, any of your Microsoft Office MIME types are missing. Anything, any kind of video codec, video players. There's one flavor of PDF. Well, as we all know, there's multiple flavors of PDFs out there. So basically, all of your traffic is going to get denied because it doesn't match this list of MIME types. If we look at the predefined list in here, I've never taken the time to count those out, but there's probably hundreds in here, several hundred, that we can go through and add these in. Apple files, you know, just a few things. PGP keys, all kinds of different things. Rich text format, even just basic stuff like Microsoft Rich Text is not going to be allowed through unless I add that in. So I've added that in here. The problem with doing it this way, you are more secure, but this becomes an admin nightmare. You've got to keep that up and maintain it. I've run a firewall back in my consulting days that used this setting, and even after the firewall had been up for a year, we were averaging on a normal week, we would get at least 3 different requests to add something new to this list. So the list is ever growing, ever changing. Sometimes you have predefined ones, sometimes you don't have a predefined one. You have to do a little research and add it in yourself. So it really becomes a nightmare, and this is what's going to break about 90% of your traffic, because you've got to list, you've got to explicitly list with the default stance everything you ever want to allow through. So how do we get around that? Well, let's change our view up here a little bit. First of all, I just want to illustrate, you've got the none in here. If we look at our change view of this none is also a valid MIME type. If there's no MIME type listed, that could be valid as well. But if I go back to my basic view, I'm going to remove that one I just added in, and then I'm going to get rid of a lot of the stuff up here at the top. And I'm going to say, well, okay, if it's text, we know text files can't be malicious. At least not yet. They haven't figured out how to embed malicious code into a text file. If you do, you could write all the virus signature and all the virus information for an executable in a text file, but until you compile it, which changes the MIME type, it's not going to be something malicious. So we're going to allow the basic stuff through. If we know it's harmless, why bother with it? Why scan it? And we're going to change our stance to be, if we see this basic stuff, we let it through. And anything else, rather than deny it, let's employ our AV engine. We've paid for the security subscription on the box, and let's AV scan. So that way, we're letting stuff through that we know is harmless. We're not worried about it, but everything else, we're going to turn the AV scanner on and let it have a look at it. And that way, all of these MIME types that we're getting blocked, yeah, we let them through, but we make sure we run our virus signatures against them. And of course, running AV scans always introduces latency on a box, so you do want to make sure your box is sized appropriately. The next section I want to highlight and illustrate here is our body content types. This is actually looking at if somebody's specifically downloading a file, this is going to look inside the file and get the MIME type of the actual download. And you'll notice we've got a list of things in here that includes some pretty common things: zip archives, Windows EXEs, cab archives, things that we probably need in our environment at some point. Zip files, EXEs, things like Windows updates. Windows updates is always an exception in our proxy list so that we can get those through. But other websites where you could have valid tools coming through, we probably don't want to block zip files or EXEs. So again, I do the same thing to change this up. Remove those from our list. Things that we know we really don't need to allow through, we can leave in the list and leave those to deny, but everything else, AV scan it. And of course, because you're AV scanning, there's a checkbox to log it. My general rule is if you're using Dimension and you see a box to log something, check the box. So this is going to fix the content types fix the first 90% of your errors. This is going to take you to 98%. You're still going to have occasional websites that are just not going to like our proxies. And that's the last 2%, 1 or 2% of things, that's where we get into a proxy exception. Now this is a blank, clean rule that I'm creating. If we looked into my main rules on my firewall that I'm running here, there's one exception that I always have to put in, and those of you guys that have younger kids will recognize this maybe. For some reason, the Webkinz website, which is a little stuffed animal toy that the kids get, has a tag in its ear that you put a serial number in, and you can play and feed and pet your stuffed animal online, just like you do in real life. So for some reason, their website, I've tweaked it and tried to tune it, but when you have a crying 7-year-old girl because her Webkinz is starving, you sometimes just want to add an exception in. So this is going to be, again, down here, another log each transaction that matches an exception, so we want to log these things. So if you have a website, just for some reason you're tired of tweaking it, or you can't identify the problem, you can put it into the proxy exception list, which is going to skip some of the scanning above, the deep inspection of that, and let that through. So this is going to fix 99.9% of the problems that you do experience on the internet at any given point using the proxies. So with this, we have a couple of things we've covered. In the general settings, a few checkboxes to check automatically, changes to our content types, what we're doing, setting it up to AV scan, body content types. And we talked a couple of weeks ago about reputation-enabled defense. We'll cover in another thing your antivirus setting. We could spend hours and hours going over the proxies, but I wanted to make sure you have a few basics over what is how to keep the proxies from breaking a lot of your internet traffic. So you'll notice when I go to save this and say OK, it's going to ask me to give it a new name. That is because it was copied from our template settings, so we want to make sure we keep those templates clean so we can always get back to them. So I'm just going to call this one Demo for our webinar here. And then I see my proxy action is set to Demo. Now the nice thing is if I create more proxy rules, and I don't want to recreate these settings for every proxy rule, I can actually go in and choose and apply which proxy settings I want to apply right here without recreating them every time. So that covers looking at the HTTP-client. Now in 11.9.3, our development staff made some changes to the defaults within the proxy actions. So for people that are running 11.9.3 or higher, current release is 11.9.4, you'll use this HTTP-client.standard. They did that to differentiate the change here. So let's take a look at this here. This one's actually going to be a little easier for you because they've taken some of those things that we took as best practices that you always had to change, and now they've made them the defaults. So when I look at HTTP-client.standard, first thing I'm going to look at, General Settings tab, first checkbox I should always check, Enable Logging for Reports is already checked for me. The Allow Range Requests through and logging that action is already set for me. The URL path length has already been doubled to 4096 for me. So I'm not going to have some of the problems that I saw in the past with my defaults. Even though they were more secure, we are now allowing some of that through just for the sake of productivity because you've got to be able to work. Now let's look down here at the content types. You'll notice a big change here. We've still got that default list of stuff that we had. The predefined list is still there. But what we've said is we've now changed the stance to, if it matches my list above, allow it through. If it doesn't match the list above, allow it, but log it. Because we've got the powerful dimension reporting tool, we want to be able to see what's happening, and we want to be able to log that. So again, this is going to, if you use the dot standard, you're not going to break nearly as much traffic because we're allowing things through. Now again, your best practice is going to be, let's get rid of some of this stuff up above, remove that from the list. We'll leave basic text because we don't care because it's not malicious. If it matches, allow that. If it doesn't match, your best practice is still to turn on your AV scanner so that we can look at that traffic a little deeper. You've paid for the tools. Let's put the protection in place. We want the more barriers between us and the outside world, the better. So again, turning on the AV scanner is going to be a big difference here for you in your security. Also, we go to body content types. And you'll notice these other ones that are in the list here have been grayed out. That's because if I go into my advanced view, they've been disabled. So I can turn some on. And this one comes down to really just a business decision. From a security standpoint, if I'm trying to keep up on my security, I don't want to let any kind of Windows executable through. However, I do realize that in the normal course of business, some people might need to allow that through. Updates, patches, if you live in my network here, the latest game clients to download and updates to your games, you've got to get those through. So that becomes a decision of, do you want to deny that? You can just disable the EXEs. And again, your best practice is we want to basically say, AV scan the traffic. And in this case, I will probably turn on if you match this list or not, especially if I'm allowing EXEs to come through. If I turn this back on and I change my action for EXEs to be allow, I can tell it to AV scan inside of here specifically for the EXEs. However, I prefer, if you're in my list here, if you're matching it, we're allowing you, let's AV scan it. And again, of course, turn on your logging. Your proxy exceptions are going to work the same, but if you have a website that you can't tweak and tune to get through, throw it in the exceptions list. So quick recap, prior to 11.9.3, so 11.9.2 and earlier, you had to remove those things from the content types list and turn on your AV scanning. 11.9.3 and newer, it's going to allow them through, which is not as secure by default, but does open it up so that you can actually function. But your best practice is to still go in and turn on the AV scan for your different MIME types. So again, thank you guys for your attendance. We're getting close to our half an hour here. With this, please make sure you type out any questions you have in the chat, and we will answer those through the email. Thank you for your attention. I hope you guys have a good afternoon and a good weekend, and I'll turn it back over to Elaine.